Thank you, Ingalill. That was very sweet. And thank you, Sushi, for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here this evening. This is Gensler, where I work in downtown LA, if you guys haven't been here. It's a firm, it's the largest architecture firm in the world with around 6,000 employees, and in LA we are around 550. So very large firm, and we do very large projects. Next. Some of the projects that you're probably aware of, the Ritz-Carlton in downtown LA, which was completed nearly a decade ago, next door to Staples Center. LAFC, which is completing next month, the new soccer stadium by USC. You can see downtown in the distance. And then the studio that I'm in, which is aviation and transportation, we do a lot of work out at LAX. A renovation to Tom Bradley, the facade coming soon. But I didn't come here to talk about all of these very large projects. Next, I wanted to talk about what all these projects have in common, which is resistance. And what they might not be teaching you at architecture school is that some of the most difficult problems beyond the design solutions is convincing the public of your work. And so at Gensler, if you can go to the next slide, one of the things that we do advocate for is having design discussion in the office. So we have a large open office space with big atrium seating, and we invite outside groups to come into the office to talk about design problems, to talk about things going on in the city. And I started nearly 5 years ago, and this is one of the things that drew me to the office, is that I was really interested in continuing this discussion and having it out in the open. But one of the things that I noticed, if you go next, is that this discussion was predominantly happening inside the box. And so the people who were most in opposition to the projects that we're doing, they weren't aware of these discussions. And so I was really interested in how we could start to utilize architecture to create space for architecture. So essentially taking these discussions and design and pulling them outside of the box and into the city. And so in between these large projects that I was working on, I started developing some other projects on the side. And we can start going the next. So I'm going to talk about 3 of these that I've done in the past 3 years, Fig Jam, Jump On, and Switch. The first one is Fig Jam, which was a Great Streets Challenge Grant winner between the years of 2015 and 2016. So the Great Streets program was Eric Garcetti's first initiative in the city. I believe it came out in 2013. And what it really set out to do is to remake LA City streets into something where people could play, walk, live, and really get to know each other out in the street, instead of just being predominantly a street or predominantly being a space for vehicles. It was really about making streets a space for people. And so the challenge grant, next, set forth 14 streets that he was really interested in remaking. And one of them happened to be in my neighborhood, Figueroa. So this is a picture of Figueroa in Highland Park. Some things that you might not know about Highland Park is that it's the home to Chicken Boy, which is lovingly referred to as the Statue of Liberty of LA. And this is Amy Inahu, who's on our project team, and Chicken Boy in the background. And Figueroa also is the original, North Figueroa, also is the original Route 66, next. And so the architecture of Figueroa and the scale of it is very small, and it used to, 2 stories in height typically. It used to have a streetcar going down the center of it, and people in Highland Park are extremely passionate about not only the architecture of the street, but the history of it and all the businesses that used to be in Highland Park. The same year that Chicken Boy came to North Figueroa, Fashion 21 opened on North Figueroa, which is the original Forever 21, in case you guys didn't know that fact. And then next. But around 2011, Highland Park started to change pretty drastically. It was named the hottest neighborhood in the US by Redfin. And quickly, the storefronts on North Figueroa and the other commercial business district, York, started turning over. And people in the neighborhood became very, very nervous about losing the culture and the history of what made Highland Park so wonderful. And so in looking at the challenge grant, we were really interested in how not only could great streets look forward, but how they could also look back and incorporate the history of the street along with what we had planned for the future. Next. So if you don't know about Highland Park, a lot of people think it's this now, a place for hipsters, but actually, next. I Googled Highland Park and that came up, which is kind of funny. So Highland Park, as you can see, if you're not aware, it exists along the 110, which is the red line. And then North Figueroa, which I was talking about earlier, which is the Great Street, runs parallel to that red line, just a few blocks in. I originally, when I got this idea about working on the Great Streets Grant, I reached out to a bunch of my friends in the community. And what's amazing about communities in LA is that there are an infinite number of people who are really interested in design. So in Highland Park next, just in Highland Park, so I'm Gensler. One of my really good friends worked at Woodbury University, and we connected with all of these other individuals who lived and worked in Highland Park to put together a grant proposal for North Figueroa. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that grant proposal and then about the event that we put on. Next. So we started out by looking at the street as it existed in 2015. So it was going through rapid change, but there was still a lot of areas which were either closed storefronts or, they didn't have the cash flow or the money to really present themselves in a way that was going to be equitable and marketable for both older residents and new residents. And so what we started to look at is how we could start to very, very simply introduce a unique color coding system to allow businesses to read across the streets while also talking about what was going on inside of them. So we developed 4 different color codings: healthy streets, food and business, arts and culture, and the last one, which I'm planning on, is civic engagement. And so the idea was that we would go through the neighborhood, interview the businesses, and decide and understand what they were really about, and then color code them on the sidewalk and maybe along a small part of the elevation so that people could really start to understand what was going on inside of that business. It was a very, very simple idea that we hoped would read not only to pedestrians on the street, but people who were driving cars very quickly through the neighborhood could start to understand what the street was about. Next. And so we did some very basic studies about what these color-coded bands could look like. We originally were looking at vinyl, and what we soon realized as we started interviewing the various businesses next is that a lot of them had really amazing stories to tell, as well as stories about the business that was there before them and the business before that. And so what we decided we wanted to do was incorporate all of this information somehow into a ribbon or a band that really expressed what was going on inside the box, so that people who were walking down the street could start to get an idea about the history of the street, as well as understanding that this business is about civic engagement. It used to have an arts and a graphic company that reached out to the public basically and used posters to really connect neighbors. And then another business might be about food and beverage, but it previously had some other aspect. Next. And so then after understanding the color coding for the street, we started doing mapping exercises where we'd understand how those bands would bleed out onto the sidewalk, and even the potential to bleed out into parking spaces or crosswalks to really liven up the street for the one day that we were planning for Fig Jam. Next. And so this is a very basic rendering of what we proposed to the city. And we said, listen, this is really about creating a festival and excitement for the neighborhood, but also really making the street vibrant and color coding these businesses, but inviting everyone out onto the street, closing down as much of the car traffic as possible, and truly making Figueroa a great street that speaks to the future, but also to its heritage and its past. And so we submitted this grant in May of 2015 to the city next, and we found out that we won 2 months later, so we were very excited. And we immediately went to work on all the various aspects. So in the office in Gensler, we had a team of a couple of people who started studying the bands and how that they could start to become three-dimensional objects, not necessarily flat planes on the buildings. So we were looking about how we could start to integrate program for the day into these objects. So the idea of a DJ booth folding into a band that talked about maybe there's a record store inside. Next. And then another thing that could become a planter but still has these stories to tell that talk about what the business used to be or what it is currently. Next. And so we developed a series of these three-dimensional objects and band studies, and then we had a series of community meetings. And so this is basically the culmination of all the work, but also what I had originally talked about was getting the design out of the box and out into the streets. And what's funny is that when we put together these community meetings, what we found out is that while people were pretty excited about the idea of having like a DJ booth on the street or the idea of having a planter, they were more excited about the activities. And so while as an architecture firm, we really wanted to design something physical, I think we had to understand that this was really about designing an environment. And so giving way to some of our desires and letting the community come forward. And so we had a series of events where we allowed them to place various objects on the street, which they were interested in, street trees, sidewalk seating. But then also we had a separate map where they could write down memories of what they really remembered about the street throughout the years. And so we took all of these things and we sort of rethought everything. We kept the original color banding idea, but we slimmed it way down and gave a bunch of money back to the community to create events during the day. So you can go next. So this is a map, the final map of Fig Jam that was published in the paper. As you can see, we had around 80 businesses participating in various ways, either through open houses or having presentations out on the street. We color-coded every single one of those businesses. And next, and the way that we did this unofficially, what's the word I'm looking for? We did it very effectively, but with very few resources, is we canvassed the sidewalk with paper and glue. So it was basically like paper mache. It was super, super inexpensive. We bought a bunch of rolls of really bright color, made an incredible amount of batches of paper mache, and went to work. So this is a test that we did outside my house just to see how well things would stick. And then we created sandwich boards for all of the businesses that incorporated the original ideas that we had about these businesses. So next, you can start to see the sandwich boards. They had icons which designated what type of businesses they were. And then we integrated quotes from the community. You can see on the far your left, as well as what the business was before, what is nearby the business, and then also we had sandwich boards for all the events that were going around. And so we ended up making around 80 of these sandwich boards. They were English on one side, Spanish on the other. So they were dual language, and people could interact with them. And then we placed these throughout the street. Next, during Fig Jam, which happened one Saturday in February. And you can start to see some of the other activities that came along. There was a business that was closed. It was under construction during the event, and we wanted it to be colorful, and so we invited a local high school to do a mural. The cat on the left, which is kind of fun. And then here you can start to see some of the color banding outside the yoga studio. Next. And then other aspects of other areas of the community came in and also did their own thing. So people created a makeshift bike lane during the day. We had a play plaza with colored chalk and other aspects for kids. Next. people put on theatrical events in one of the buildings. LADOT was there, and they had a painted piano so people could just play music on the sidewalk. Next. And so our big takeaway from this was that the design out in the community really supported the play for the communities. So they came together and put on an event that supported them, but also it was about a playful environment in the street for them. And soon after this, next, is when the mayor's office reached out to me about doing a project for him at the mayor's residence. So basically, the mayor hosts events at the Getty Foundation, which is his residence, throughout the year to fundraise. And so the events are called Ingalill, and he was doing one based on great streets, and he asked me, not him personally, but someone in his staff asked me if we could put together a project that he could use to fundraise for great streets. And when I asked, well, what should this project be about? And they said, well, it should be something similar to Fig Jam, so it's using design to engage the public. So that was all the prompt that we had. We had 2 weeks to put it together. And so I worked with another woman in my office, Tanya Paz, to put together a proposal that we then pitched during the event to the mayor and all the people invited there. And so next. I talked a little bit, sorry. Next. So I'm going to just run through this proposal really quickly. So when we thought about great streets, Tanya and I mean, one of the things that make the streets least playful is traffic, right? The thing that is most upsetting about Los Angeles streets is the traffic on them. And every Angelino, unless you're super fortunate and get to walk everywhere you go, has to endure traffic in some way. Next. So when you're going from A to B, you usually go the same way. You have a route that you travel. It's very, very comfortable. And you take it every day. You know, you have routes that you go from the grocery store to school, and you very rarely deviate from them unless Waze tells you to. And you may take that by car, or if you're lucky, you get to go by bus. If you're even luckier, next, maybe you ride your bike, which some people do, and the lucky of us get to walk. But you pretty much have the route that you go on. Next. The problem is when that route gets interrupted. And what we found is that this is when most people encounter construction projects. This is the first time. So maybe they're building a large building in downtown LA and they have part of a street blocked off, and this is how you experience it, in that it is interrupting your commute, and therefore it's frustrating, right? You immediately, like, why are they building this project here? Because now I cannot get to drop off my son at school. It's taking me 5, 10, 15 minutes longer. Next. And so what we wanted to do is understand how you could start to turn this situation on its head. So instead of the inconvenience automatically making you frustrated, how could we take the idea of this construction cone, which is essentially what's telling you that change is happening, that progress is coming, and instead of making it very, very simply an icon that you recognize as something that is annoying, change it into something that's fun. So you see it on the side of the road and you're immediately like, oh, I might slow down and check this out instead of just being angered by it. Next. And so what we came with was, at a very, very basic level, a jumpy house, which is an inflatable that you could pop up on a corner, and what it tells you is that change is coming. Something new is about to happen on this corner, and we want to hear your thoughts about it. Not only do we want to hear your thoughts about it, but we want you to get excited about it rather than just being upset about it. Next. So the reason why we went with the inflatable is obviously it's very light touch. And so with the city, we were concerned about doing anything that they would have to come in and deal with infrastructure either through lighting that had to be plugged in or anything else. And so the great thing about this is that you can put it in the back of the truck, drive it to the site, inflate it, and within a matter of hours, it's ready to go. It's ready to engage with the public. Next. But it's not just inflatable jumpy house, it's also smart. And so Jump On uses Arduino technology to read social media and understand the community. So as you're driving by it, maybe you're texting about something, maybe you're texting about the Dodgers and they just lost or whatever. And so it reads the mood of the community and then changes its color. Next, so the idea is that the city, LADOT, LA Metro, could put these things out, or maybe a developer, CBRE has a bunch of them and they put them out, and you can start to read the mood of the community based on Jump On. Next. And so Jump On isn't something that's just active. It doesn't have to be just active, during a certain time of the day. It can be active all day. So in the morning, it can be a place where you sit down and relax, have some coffee. You learn about the project that's coming. You're waiting for your bus. You're relaxing. Next. Maybe it exists next to a school that's being expanded, or a vacant lot. It's a place for kids to play and hang out. Next. And then in the evenings, it can be a place for community meetings or a social gathering. Next. Always changing colors. So we put together this presentation. We made a model of it so we could really start to look at it and the scale of it. This is a vacant street corner near USC. We wanted it to be big so that cars driving by would be able to see it, as well as people not really being able to avoid it. Next. And then we presented it to the mayor and LADOT and a bunch of other people. Next. This is my moment of fame, standing next to the mayor. But what was really great about this project is that it was super playful and it was no holds bar. So we just put it together in between working on really big jobs for clients with lots of money and really tight deadline. We threw this together and it was really fun and engaging, and in general they were super excited about it, especially LADOT. They got very excited about it. Next. So around this time, Gensler has an internal research program that you are allowed to apply for, and then they will set aside a budget and you can do projects. What's interesting about this is that the amount of money is just small enough that you can do the research, but very rarely are you able to produce something outside of that. And so around the time that we were wrapping up Jump On and LADOT was becoming very interested in it, Roger Sherman, who's a teacher at UCLA, was starting a research project based on autonomous vehicles and a conference that was happening, it just happened last fall actually, called LA Commotion, the Street in the Future. Next. And so he approached me about working on this research project with him, and I said, hey, LADOT is actually really interested in something like Jump On, something that we can take out into the community and they can use it to engage with people. What if we get some extra funding from them and actually try and produce this? And so next, we teamed up together. He worked in a research studio at UCLA. I started doing a lot of work around autonomous vehicles in the office. We pitched this idea of Switch, which is basically we'll talk about it, which is a reconfigurable furniture piece that works with autonomous vehicles to LADOT, and they bought it, hook, line, and sinker. Next. So we started working on this idea. We knew we had funding from LADOT, and we were really interested in putting together a piece that would could be reconfigurable and work with autonomous vehicles in a new way. And we're also interested in making it flat pack so that LADOT could take it and push it around the city wherever it needed to go. Next. We studied it in 3D. We also looked at how it could be rearranged in plan and in section. Next. And then we made various scale models and took it to LODUT so they could play with it and see how it could be utilized either as a table or a shade or a seat. Next. And then we started working with the conference, LA Commotion, because we knew that they were going to have autonomous vehicles there, about how we could really start to understand how Switch transformed. And so we looked at four various settings that had to do with work, play, active transportation, and more of a nightlife scene. And so the idea was that each day the furniture would rearrange itself and the autonomous vehicle would react to it. So unlike a traditional street where the lanes are painted on the road and they're the same every single day and they never change, the idea here was that the furniture could rearrange and the lanes would just move around them as necessary and people could interact, and it would be completely safe because autonomous vehicles would be able to read them. Next. So we did a various number of these. So this one is work. It starts to talk about how you could have group settings within Switch. Next. This one is play. So they rearranged into tables for tennis, areas for kids. Next. And then next. So we did a series of these. We presented them LA Commotion. They liked them. And so we proceeded to produce the project. Next. We worked with a local foam manufacturer. Next. To cut the pieces. And then we sprayed it with like a Krylon paint. Next. And then installed it on the street. So it was on Coylton Street in November, which is near the A+D Museum in the Arts District, if you're aware. And what's interesting about this project is that we were always working in the computer or at the office, and then when you got out to the street, you realize that the street is very different than in a Revit model, right? It's not flat, for one thing. It has a ditch in the middle of it, a drainage ditch. And so we had to, the great thing was that Switch is reconfigurable, so we had to sort of work on the fly to figure out how to rearrange the pieces based on the unlevelness of the street, and also work around other conference attendees and exhibitors. Next. So it was up for 3 days, and we switched it every single day, multiple times a day. Here it is, you can see being used as a bicycle stand during the active transportation day. Next. This is work. And you can see that people utilize Switch in ways that we didn't think. They've sat on every surface possible, pretty much. Or they found shade. They always look for shade. You can see the guys in the background there were standing in the shade. Next. This day is food. We worked with local vendors to bring out food and sell them during the day, as well as encourage people to just sit and dine. Next. And play. So also you can see Greg Lynn's autonomous bot was traveling around through Switch. Next. And then the last day was the rideshare day, when people brought out their bicycles and were able to cruise around Switch. Next. So also, Switch, one of the other things that we incorporated is that they had ultraviolet light, and so we had it painted in 2 tones so that it would glow at night. And then there was also a speaker built into it, and it played music in the evenings for parties for the conference. Next. And then we worked with, LADOT was interested in learning about how people were utilizing it, and so we worked with a company out of San Francisco called the Gale Institute to record the movements throughout the day on half-hour intervals, and then pass that information back to LADOT so that they could use it when placing it around the city. Next. So we're looking now for the next partnership, either with the city or with Metro, so we can continue this conversation. And that's it. Thank you. Next.